The sun was sinking behind the desert mesas, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Cale Lonehawk watched the dying light without blinking, as if waiting for the darkness to grant him permission to move again. Among his people he was known as a tracker of unmatched skill, a protector when needed, a hunter when duty demanded. Outsiders, however, had created their own name for him, the Ghost of the Red Plains. Kyle never cared for the rumors. Stories meant little. Honor meant everything. That evening, as he rode into the edge of a frontier settlement, his presence shifted the air. Conversations stopped. Doors shut. Children were ushered indoors. Though some feared him, many simply feared the truth he represented. That life around them was built on land and history that once belonged to others. Waiting for him in the saloon was Henry Calloway, the wealthiest man in 3 counties. Cale saw the 2 hired guns standing behind Calloway before he even stepped through the door. The room smelled of cigar smoke and stale ale, and every patron stared with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Calloway tried to hide his nerves behind an oily grin. "You came," he said, as if Cale had been summoned by magic rather than gold. Cale did not sit. "Your messenger claimed it was urgent." "Oh, it is," Calloway replied, leaning forward. "There's someone I need removed." The word hung in the air like a venomous fly. Cale's eyes, dark and calm as obsidian, did not flinch, but his silence forced Calloway to keep talking. "She's nothing but trouble. Stirring up folks about land rights, about promises the government never kept, a danger to business and to the peace I've built here." He tapped his fingers impatiently. "Her name is Leora Avery." Cale listened. He did not interrupt. He did not reveal emotion. But this was the kind of task he refused more often than he accepted. Honor required listening first. Judgment came after. Calloway mistook Cale's silence for interest and pushed a leather pouch across the table. The weight told Cale it was filled with silver coins. Make her disappear. No body, no questions. Just gone. One of the men behind Calloway smirked, assuming the deal was already secured. Cale's fingers rested near the pouch but did not touch it. "Why her?" Calloway's smugness faltered. "She's the daughter of a man who once owned half this town. I bought his debts fair and square before he died. She refuses to accept that. Keeps claiming documents were forged." He waved a dismissive hand. "She's delusional, dangerous, and stubborn as a mule." Kyle's gaze sharpened. "So she is a problem because she speaks truths you fear." Calloway stiffened. The 2 hired guns reached for their pistols. Cale's voice remained level, but his stance shifted just enough to warn them he could strike faster than they could breathe. Calloway forced a laugh. "You misunderstand. She's turning people against me. I'm just trying to maintain order." Cale finally reached out, not for the coins, but for the piece of folded paper that bore Leora's description and possible hideouts. "I will find her," Calloway exhaled in triumph. Cale pocketed the paper and turned to leave. Before he reached the door, Calloway called out, "Just to be clear, Lonehawk, I want no heroics. Dead or alive doesn't matter, as long as she's gone." Cale paused only a heartbeat, then stepped into the cooling twilight without responding. The night wind brushed against him like a warning spirit, whispering that something about this task was wrong. He untied his horse and mounted silently, staring toward the distant hills where Leora Avery would be. What kind of woman was she, to threaten a man as powerful as Henry Calloway? And why, as he rode forward, did Cale feel as though he was not entering a hunt, but the beginning of a destiny he never asked for? With the moon rising behind him, Cale Lonehawk set out into the wild, not yet knowing that the woman he had been hired to erase would soon become the only person he would ever fight to protect. Leora Avery had learned long ago that danger didn't always ride in with gunfire and shouting. Sometimes it came quietly, like a shadow breaking away from the night. She stood beside the small cabin she'd taken refuge in, stacking fresh logs for the morning fire. The wind carried a whisper of sage and dust, but beneath it, something else. A presence, someone watching. Her hand slipped instinctively to the small hunting knife tucked in her boot. When Cale Lonehawk first glimpsed her, he did not move. He crouched among the cedars, studying her silhouette as the moonlight traced the soft curve of her cheek and the determined line of her posture. She was smaller than he expected, dressed in simple clothes dusted from travel, but her eyes, sharp, alert, hinted at a spirit unbroken. She knew he was there. That impressed him. Leora's voice rang out, firm but calm. You can come out. Sneaking only works if your target is unaware. Cale rose slowly, his steps deliberate, hands kept away from the weapons at his belt. He watched her expression shift. Surprise followed by a hint of fear she refused to show. You knew I was here, he said. You weren't exactly quiet, she challenged. Or maybe I just know the land better than whoever sent you. Cale felt the truth in her words. She wasn't reckless, she was prepared, strong. He halted several paces away, giving her space. You are being hunted, she gave a humorless smile. I figured that much out when Calloway's lackeys tried to burn my last camp. Cale noted the faint bruise on her arm, the determined set of her jaw. This was no frightened fugitive. This was a woman surviving war. You've come to finish the job? She asked. The directness caught him off guard. Most targets trembled or begged. She assessed him, calculating odds, weighing risks. I was hired to find you, Cale admitted. Then why are we talking? Cale studied her closely. Every instinct told him something about Calloway's story was twisted. She carried the dignity of someone protecting what was rightfully hers. He stepped closer. Because I do not kill without knowing the truth. Her gaze softened, just for a moment, as if she hadn't expected honor from a stranger. The truth, she said quietly, is that Calloway stole my father's land. He forged signatures, bribed officials. My father died fighting to expose him. Now I carry what's left of his battle. Kyle listened without interruption, as was his way. She continued, voice steady despite the pain beneath it. I'm not trying to start a war, just undo a wrong. He believed her, completely. But belief came with consequences. The men hunting you will return, Kyle warned. More of them. I know. She gripped the knife handle tighter. Let them come. I won't kneel. Cal admired her spirit, though he recognized the danger it invited. Honor was a good path, but a lonely one if walked alone. Will you allow me to help you? He asked, her eyes widened slightly. Help me, why? Cale's response was simple and absolute. Your fight is just, silence fell. Wind rustled the grass. Coyotes cried in the distance. She studied him again. Not as an enemy this time, but as a possibility. You're Apache, she whispered. Why help a settler's daughter? Cale's expression didn't change, but his voice held depth. Injustice is the same in any language. There was no promise in his words, only truth. That was enough. Leora nodded once. Then we stand together. Cale inclined his head. For now we must move. Staying means death. She extinguished her lantern, grabbed her small satchel and stepped toward him. Not behind him, beside him. Together they vanished into the night. Two fugitives bound not by fear, but by purpose. Cale could feel it already. This woman would change everything. The darkness of the open plains was Cale's ally. Under the blanket of stars he could move as silently as wind over stone. But tonight he wasn't just guiding himself. He was responsible for someone else. Someone who had become more than just a mission. Leora rode behind him on his horse, her hands gripping the saddle horn. She tried to stay steady, but Cale could sense the exhaustion in her small shifts of balance. They had been riding for hours since leaving the cabin behind. Finally, Cale pulled the reins and slowed the horse to a halt beside an outcrop of boulders overlooking a dry riverbed. We rest here, he said. Leora slid down, wobbling slightly before regaining her footing. She looked around, scanning the shadows like a seasoned scout. Survival, it seemed, was something she'd been forced to master. Cale built a fireless Kempka stones, a blanket against the wind, no flames to reveal their position. His movements were precise, practiced. Leora watched him quietly. Why did you really take this job? She asked after a silence. Cale didn't look at her. Because saying no would have cost lives. Whose? She pressed. My tribe's. He could feel her staring, waiting for more. For years his past had been a shield in Thor, but now truth seemed less dangerous than silence. Calloway's men have harassed those who trade with my people. They blame us for resisting the settlement lines pushed across our land, he explained. Refusing him would have brought more violence to those I swore to protect. Leora lowered her gaze. So I was the lesser evil. Kyle stood, turning to face her directly. I do not kill innocents. Not for coin, not for threats. Their eyes met, and that quiet conviction softened something inside her, something she had been holding shut for too long. Before Cale could speak again, a faint glint of metal caught his attention in the moonlight. His instincts roared to life. "Down," he hissed, pulling Leora to the ground. A bullet hissed through the night where her head had been. More followed, shouts in the distance. The mercenaries had tracked them faster than Cale expected. Cale shoved a small revolver into Leora's hands. "Stay behind the rocks. Fire only if you must." "What about you?" she breathed. But he was already gone, a shadow melting into the wilderness. Gunfire cracked. Cale's arrows flew with deadly accuracy. One attacker dropped, then another. The remaining men scrambled, firing blindly into the dark, terrified of the unseen predator stalking them. One mercenary rushed toward Leora's cover, pistol raised. Breath-shaking, she steadied her hand and fired. The man fell hard, dust rising around his body. The gunshot echoed in her ears, louder than any she had heard before. She had defended her life, but the weight of taking one threatened to crush her. Cale appeared beside her, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "You did what was necessary," he said, voice calm, despite the danger still crackling in the air. She looked up at him, not with pride, but gratitude. The final mercenary fled into the darkness, too panicked to look back. Kyle retrieved his bow, listening for any other threats. When he was satisfied, he helped Leora to her feet. "They will return," he said. "Stronger. Desperate." "So what now?" she asked, voice unsteady but determined. Kyle looked toward the horizon, where the line between predator and protector had already blurred. "I make a choice," he said. "I choose to defend you." Leora swallowed hard. "But that means Calloway will come after you too." A slow nod. "Let him." The wind picked up, brushing her hair against his shoulder. Their lives had just become intertwined in a way neither had planned. Cale had been hired to make Leora disappear. Instead, he had chosen to make her mission, her survival, his own. And there was no turning back now. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon, its pale light revealing a rugged canyon path carved by centuries of wind and rain. Cale guided their horse along the narrow route, every sense alert. Leora rode behind him again, silent but awake, exhaustion still etched into her posture. The ambush from the night before had changed things. No longer was she simply escaping danger. Now she was surviving it by force. Cale pulled them into a secluded ravine and signaled for her to dismount. The shelter of the canyon walls would hide their presence for a while. Leora took a moment to stretch her aching legs, wincing. "You ride well," Cale noted. She gave a tired smile. "I ride when I must. My father taught me before he—" Her words trailed off. Some wounds still bled even when scabbed over. Cale didn't push. Instead, he handed her a small piece of dried venison. Simple food, but enough for strength. They ate in silence until Leora finally spoke again. "How many will Calloway send next?" "More," Kyle said. "Men who won't run from shadows." Leora swallowed hard. "I never asked for anyone to get hurt because of me." Kyle studied the ground, selecting smooth stones and arranging them near the canyon entrance. "Then survive. Let your father's truth live." She watched him work, noting how even the smallest action carried purpose. He was constructing something, a warning system perhaps, that would alert them to approaching threats. Efficient. Controlled. Prepared for every possibility, except one. Leora stepped nearer. "Why do you keep protecting me? You owe me nothing." Kyle paused. His response was slow, as if weighed carefully. "I was taught that strength means nothing if not used to defend what is right," he said. "Your fight is righteous. That is enough." Her breath caught, not from fear but from something gentler. Respect. Connection. But the moment shattered when Cale stiffened suddenly, eyes narrowing, hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Someone's coming, he whispered. Leora's heart raced. One of Calloway's men? Cale didn't answer. He was already moving. He pressed a hand over her mouth gently but firmly, guiding her behind a boulder. She didn't resist. From above the canyon, 3 riders appeared, mercenaries with rifles slung across their backs, scanning the terrain below. Kyle whispered against her ear, "Do not move." Leora's pulse thundered in her throat. She watched the men dismount and examine the ground. They were skilled trackers, well, nearly as skilled as Cale. One pointed toward the ravine. They were coming closer. Cale shifted silently, bow drawn, breathing calm as still water. In that second, Leora saw who he truly was. Not just a protector, but a warrior bound by something ancient and unbreakable. The first mercenary stepped too near. Cale released an arrow. It struck clean, silent. Before the others could react, he was a blur of motion, striking one with the force of a coiled catamount and disarming the other with brutal precision. Leora gasped softly. It was over in seconds. Cale stood over the men, assessing quickly. Only one still breathed. He knelt, voice low and dangerous. "Return to Calloway. Tell him Lone Hawk protects the woman now." The man nodded in terror and scrambled away, stumbling as he fled. When Cale returned to Leora, she looked at him with a new understanding. Awe mixed with fear and something deeper. "You could have killed him," she whispered. "I only kill what must not rise again," Cale replied. Their eyes held, and a silent promise formed between them. They would not be separated, not by fear, not by pursuit, not by any force Calloway could send. Cale reached for her hand, not to pull her along, but simply to show he was there. "We travel west," he said. "There are places where Calloway's reach ends." Leora clasped his hand in return, her resolve solidifying. "Then take me there," she murmured. Cale nodded once. Together. And together they mounted the horse once more, hunted, but unbroken, riding deeper into the untamed land where destiny waited like a fire yet to be lit. The days that followed were a blur of rocky trails, hidden watering holes and tense silences broken only by the calls of hawks overhead. With each mile Cale and Leora traveled, civilization and Calloway's reach grew fainter behind them. Yet trouble didn't loosen its grip entirely. The wilderness carried its own threats. Cale chose a sheltered clearing nestled between juniper trees where they could rest. The air smelled of pine sap and earth. Leora sank to her knees, grateful for the chance to breathe without urgency. "I never realized survival could be so exhausting," she murmured. Kyle allowed a small smile. "Survival is a full life's work." He handed her a canteen and knelt beside a small pile of branches, striking flint against steel. A campfire sprang to life, the first they'd risked in days. Leora leaned closer to the warmth, her eyes reflecting the flicker of flames. She studied him from across the fire. "You always move like you expect someone to attack," she said. "Even here." Cale didn't deny it. "It is safer that way." There was a heaviness in his voice, one, not fear, but memory. Leora hesitated, then asked softly, "Your family, what happened to them?" Cale's jaw tightened a moment before he answered. "My father was a leader among our people," he began. "He defended our land against those who would take it. Many battles, many losses." He paused, staring into the fire like it was a doorway into the past. "When soldiers came to force relocation, he refused to abandon the graves of our ancestors. They shot him where he stood." Leora's breath caught. "And your mother," she whispered. Kyle looked up, pain hidden beneath calm discipline. "She fell ill when the soldiers burned our crops. Hunger finished what bullets started. Silence wrapped around them. Leora's chest ached, imagining a boy forced to grow into a warrior far too soon. "I'm sorry," she breathed, sincere. Kyle nodded once, a silent thanks. He was not a man who needed pity, but he accepted empathy. "And you?" he asked gently, shifting the focus. Leora swallowed. "My father used to say the world changed too fast for honest men. He trusted the wrong people. Trusted Calloway." Her voice quivered, but she steadied herself. When father tried to expose him, he was beaten and left to die outside our home. The sheriff called it misfortune. Kyle's eyes hardened. Calloway has blood on his hands. Leora wrapped her arms around herself. I promised my father I would see justice done. I don't know how anymore. Running doesn't feel like justice. It is survival, Kyle said, and survival gives time for justice to catch up. His words soothed her more than he realized. For a while, they simply sat together, two souls bound by loss, by injustice, by a shared fight they had never asked for. Then Leora's voice turned softer, more vulnerable. Do you ever wonder if the things we fight for are enough? Cale studied her, noting the exhaustion beneath her courage. Yes, he admitted. Every day. She looked at him surprised. But doubt is not weakness, he continued. It is the mind's way of ensuring the heart fights for what is truly worth protecting. Leora's eyes lingered on him a little too long. Am I worth protecting? She asked, barely above a whisper. For the first time, Cale hesitated. Not because he lacked an answer, but because the answer felt too personal. Yes, he said finally. More than you know. Heat rose in her cheeks. She looked away, unable to hide the small, trembling smile. Nearby, an owl hooted, a reminder that night wasn't made only of fear, but of mystery and possibility. As the fire crackled low, Cale stood and extended his hand to her. Rest, he said. Tomorrow we move again. She placed her hand in his, small, warm, trusting. And so beneath a blanket of stars with danger still lurking unseen, their bond deepened. Not just allies now, not merely survivors. Something stronger was taking root, something neither of them could walk away from anymore. The sun had barely risen when Cale sensed it. The subtle tremor in the earth, the distant clatter of hooves against rock and soil. He froze, one hand gripping the reins, eyes scanning the horizon. Leora followed his gaze, her breath hitching. They're coming, he said quietly. Leora's hand instinctively went to the knife at her belt. How many? More than last night. They learned from their mistakes. Cale's jaw tightened. Calloway doesn't fail twice, and he won't send amateurs again. They crouched behind a line of jagged rocks overlooking a narrow pass. From this vantage, Cale could see three groups of men approaching. The first led by a mercenary brandishing a rifle with a cruel glint. The second on horseback wielding clubs and pistols, and the third creeping along the ridge attempting to flank them. The landowner had come prepared. Cale studied the formations. Every instinct honed over decades whispered the same truth. This would not be a simple skirmish. They were outnumbered. Survival would demand precision, patience, and trust. Stay close, he whispered to Leora. Do exactly as I say. She nodded, swallowing the fear that clutched at her chest. She had survived bullets and ambushes before, but facing so many with their lives on the line made her pulse drum like a war drum. Still, she trusted Cale. That trust, fragile yet fierce, was their strongest weapon. Cale released an arrow from his bow and a soft, whistling sound in the morning air, striking the first attacker attempting to cross the rocky outcrop. The man crumpled silently, and the others barely registered the loss before Cale was already moving, disappearing into the shadows, reappearing elsewhere like a ghost. Leora followed his cues, flinching only once as she dodged behind a boulder and fired a pistol he had handed her. The bullet struck one of the flanking men in the leg. He fell, screaming, giving them precious seconds. Cale's movements were fluid, deliberate. Each strike precise, each calculation meticulous. He disarmed and incapacitated men before they even realized what threatened them. For Leora, it was terrifying and awe-inspiring. She had never seen someone move with such lethal grace and such unwavering control. One of the remaining mercenaries lunged toward Leora, clearly aiming to finish what his comrades had failed. She raised the pistol, shaking, but Cale's hand shot out from the shadows, intercepting the man with the flat of his blade. He pushed Leora back, then moved with a speed and strength that left her breathless as he subdued the attacker. After what felt like hours compressed into minutes, silence finally fell. The wounded, frightened, and outmatched fled. Cale lowered his weapon, checking on Leora. You okay? He asked, voice steady but urgent. She nodded, trembling, gripping the pistol like a lifeline. I think so. Cale studied the distant horizon. The threat was temporarily gone, but Calloway's determination, and his resources, were endless. They would come again, better prepared, more ruthless. You fought well, Kale said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Fear is natural, but courage is what will carry us forward. And you, Leora, have plenty of it. She looked up at him, seeing not just a protector, but a man who respected her spirit and strength. Her chest swelled with something she hadn't expected. Gratitude, yes, but also a quiet, simmering admiration. Kale's eyes, dark and sharp as a hawk's, softened just a fraction. We rest tonight, he said. Tomorrow we move farther west, somewhere Calloway cannot reach. But remember this, survival is more than avoiding bullets. It is learning to trust, to fight as one. For the first time since he had found her, Leora truly understood what that meant. She was not alone. And Kale was not just her protector. He was the partner she never knew she needed. As the sun dipped lower, painting the canyon walls in amber and shadow, they settled down, both alert, both aware, but with the faintest hint of hope. The landowner had struck back, but Kyle and Leora had survived. Together they had become more than hunter and prey. They had become allies, bound not just by danger, but by a growing, unspoken bond. The journey ahead promised more trials, but for the first time, they were ready to face them, side by side. The canyon was quiet in the early morning, the sun rising like molten gold over jagged cliffs. Kale and Leora moved cautiously, the weight of exhaustion and fear lingering in their bones. They were no longer running blindly. Each step was deliberate, every sound scrutinized. Kale, Leora whispered, pointing toward the ridge. There's movement. Kale's eyes narrowed. A small group of men, heavily armed and better trained than the ones before, crested the hill. Calloway's top enforcers. They had tracked them through the wilderness, following the signs Kale could only partially obscure. We have no choice, Kale said. We make our stand here. Leora's hand trembled slightly as she gripped her pistol. A stand? You mean fight? Kale nodded. Not just fight. Survive. And prove we cannot be broken. They found cover behind a cluster of rocks that jutted from the canyon floor. Kale whispered instructions, his voice calm and commanding, a stark contrast to the chaos he anticipated. Leora listened intently, trusting his every word. She had learned to follow his lead, to anticipate his movements. But this battle would test both of them like never before. The first enforcer advanced, confident, expecting an easy victory. Kale's arrow struck silently, dropping him before he could reach cover. The second raised his rifle, and Kyle was already moving, stepping into the shadows, silent as a whisper of wind. Leora fired at a man trying to flank them, her aim steady despite the pounding of her heart. Each attack was calculated, each defense precise. Kale moved like a storm, swift and unstoppable, protecting Leora as he struck down enemies one by one. She too had found her rhythm, dodging, shooting, and trusting him completely. During a brief pause, Kale and Leora crouched behind a boulder. His hand found hers, squeezing it tightly. Are you all right? He asked, though the answer was clear from her determined eyes. I am, she whispered, though her voice carried more than courage. It carried a growing realization. She was no longer just surviving with him. She was connected to him, dependent on his presence in ways she hadn't anticipated. A shout tore through the canyon. One of Calloway's men had regrouped and aimed a rifle at Leora. Kyle reacted instantly, tackling her behind a rock and knocking the rifle aside. The attacker stumbled, and Kale dispatched him with the precision that made Leora's stomach tighten. You cannot always rely on me, Kale said quietly, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. You must be ready. But together we are unstoppable. She nodded, understanding not only the danger but the truth behind his words. Their partnership had shifted, from survival to mutual reliance, from cautious trust to a connection that neither could deny. The final enforcer fled, terror etched into his features. Kyle and Leora remained, catching their breath as silence reclaimed the canyon. Kyle turned to her, voice soft but firm. You fought bravely today. Do you understand what that means? She shook her head. I think I do. We are more than prey now. We are equals in this fight. Kale studied her for a moment longer, eyes dark with unspoken emotions. Then he leaned close, voice barely a whisper. You are not just someone I protect, Leora. You are someone I cannot allow to be harmed. You are worth more than survival. You are worth my life. Her pulse quickened. She had never heard anyone say anything like that, not in words, not in intent. She felt something shift inside her, a tremor of hope, courage, and something far more intimate. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the canyon walls in a fiery glow. Cale and Leora stood side by side, not just as allies, but as something stronger. The bond forged in the crucible of survival had become unbreakable, and both knew that nothing, not Calloway, not danger, not even the wild, could tear them apart. And in that moment, something changed between them. Survival was no longer enough. Together, they were ready to fight for justice, for freedom, and unknowingly, for each other. The desert night had fallen quiet, the horizon a haze of silver moonlight against the rugged cliffs. Cale and Leora had set up a small camp near a hidden spring, their fire low to avoid detection. The echoes of the previous battle still hummed in their bones. But the immediate danger had passed, and for now, Kyle sat a short distance from the fire, sharpening his bow, the rhythmic rasp of the stone against the wood almost meditative. Leora watched him from the other side, the flickering flames dancing in her eyes. She had never known a man like him, someone so lethal, so precise, yet capable of tenderness in the quiet moments. Finally, she spoke, her voice hesitant. "Kyle, I've been thinking." He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers, unreadable but patient. "About what? About us," she said softly. "About everything we've been through." Her fingers fiddled with the strap of her satchel. "I know we were thrown together by necessity, by survival. But somewhere along the way it's become more than that." Cale set aside his bow, leaning forward slightly. The air between them held a tension neither had acknowledged until now. "Go on," he urged. "I trust you," she admitted. "I've never trusted anyone like this before, and I think I've come to care for you, more than I should have expected." Her gaze fell to the ground briefly, then returned to his, searching for a response. Cale's expression softened, a rare glimpse of the man behind the warrior. He stepped closer, the firelight illuminating the strong lines of his face, the intensity of his gaze tempered by something gentler. "Leora, you do not know how long I have waited to hear you say that." She blinked, startled. "Waited?" "Yes," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. "From the first moment I saw you, I knew you were different. Not just brave, but honest, fierce, unyielding. And I realized then that the task I had been hired to perform could never be completed. Not because I could not, but because I could not allow it. You were never a target. You became something far more important." Her chest tightened. She felt heat rising in her cheeks, but also an overwhelming sense of relief. "Important?" Cale nodded, stepping even closer. "More important than any contract, any threat, any danger. You are my choice, Leora. I choose to protect you, and not just for survival, but because you are worth it. Because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears threatened to spill down her cheeks, but she blinked them back, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words. "Kyle, I never thought I'd find someone I could trust so completely. And now, I feel as though I can't imagine not being with you." Kyle reached for her hand, holding it gently, yet with a strength that anchored them both. "Then trust me completely," he said. "Not just in battle, not just in survival, but in life. Let me stand by you, not as a protector alone, but as a partner, as someone who loves you." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The fire crackled, the desert was still, and only their hearts spoke in the silence. I love you too," Leora whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "I never expected it, but I do." Kyle's dark eyes softened, and for the first time his guard fully lowered. He drew her close, careful and deliberate, their foreheads touching in a moment of quiet intimacy. "Then we face everything together," he said. "Calloway, the wilderness, whatever comes next, together." Leora rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt safe, not just from enemies, but from fear itself. They sat together beneath the moonlight, hands entwined, hearts aligned. Danger still lingered in the distance, but for this night, they were no longer hunted, no longer fugitives. They were two souls bound by choice, by courage, and now by love. The fire crackled low. The desert whispered its secrets, and Cale and Leora allowed themselves to imagine a future together, not just surviving, but living side by side as equals, as partners, as lovers. The morning air was crisp as Cale and Leora approached the outskirts of the small settlement where Calloway had first hired Cale. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the streets were still quiet, the townsfolk wary but curious. They had spent weeks evading danger in the wilderness, building trust and strength together. Now it was time to end the threat for good. Cale's eyes scanned the town from a ridge above. Calloway's mansion loomed at the edge of town, an imposing structure of brick and timber, surrounded by hired guards who were oblivious to the pair watching from above. Cale's jaw tightened. "They think they are untouchable," he muttered. "But power built on fear is fragile." Leora's hand slid into his, a silent gesture of solidarity. "We end this today," she said. Her voice carried the steel of someone who had survived bullets, ambushes, and nights spent in freezing deserts. Cale nodded. "We do it smart. Not with anger, but with precision." The plan was simple yet daring. Cale and Leora moved like shadows, avoiding patrols, slipping through alleyways and using the town's own architecture as cover. Their connection, forged in the fires of survival, gave them an almost unspoken rhythm. Leora handled diversions, creating subtle chaos that drew guards away, while Cale disabled key sentries, leaving no trace of their presence. Finally, they reached the mansion's main gate. Cale knelt, examining the locks. "We have one chance," he murmured. "Stay close. Trust me." With a practiced hand, Cale slipped the bolt and they entered. The mansion was quiet, eerily so. Calloway, confident in his wealth and his men, had grown complacent. That complacency would be his undoing. They crept through the halls, the floorboards silent beneath Cale's careful steps. Leora's heart raced, not from fear but from anticipation. Every step brought them closer to confronting the man who had caused so much suffering. Suddenly, a door swung open. Calloway himself stood there, flanked by two armed men. "You," he barked. "What are you doing here?" Kyle stepped forward, his presence commanding and unyielding. "I came to end this, Calloway. Your threats, your lies, your cruelty, it stops today." Calloway sneered. "You think you can challenge me? You're just one man, and she is nothing without me." Leora stepped forward, her voice steady. "I am not nothing. I am the reason your empire is built on fear, and today, it ends." A scuffle broke out, swift and brutal. Cale disarmed one of the guards while Leora incapacitated the other, their teamwork flawless. Calloway lunged at Cale, desperate and enraged, but Cale sidestepped, using the man's momentum against him. With a precise throw, Calloway was pinned against the wall, gasping and defeated. Cale's voice was calm, resolute. "This is your last chance, Calloway. Leave the town and never return, or I make sure the law and the people you've wronged see justice done." Calloway's face paled. He realized that the man he had underestimated was not just a tracker or warrior. Cale was a force of honor, unyielding and incorruptible. Trembling, Calloway nodded, realizing his defeat. Leora exhaled, relief washing over her. "It's over," she whispered. Cale gave a small nod, but his focus remained sharp, ever vigilant. They left the mansion together, stepping into the morning light. The townspeople, who had hidden behind curtains and doors, emerged slowly, witnessing the end of Calloway's reign. Murmurs of gratitude and astonishment followed them as Cale and Leora mounted their horse. For the first time in weeks, they felt the weight of freedom, not just from immediate danger, but from the shadow of Calloway's tyranny. They had survived. They had triumphed. And through it all, their bond had been tested, proven unbreakable. Cale glanced at Leora, his expression softening. "We face whatever comes next, together." She smiled, gripping his hand. "Together," she echoed. As they rode out of the settlement, the horizon stretched wide before them. The sun rose higher, painting the plains with golden fire. Danger remained in the world, but for Cale and Leora, nothing could break what had been forged in the crucible of survival, trust, and love. They had won justice. They had claimed their freedom. And most importantly, they had chosen each other. The plain stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Cale and Leora rode side by side, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dust that glimmered in the sun. After weeks of constant danger, running and fighting, the sense of freedom was almost dizzying. The wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth, a reminder that the wilderness could both challenge and sustain life, and that they now faced it together, not as hunted fugitives but as partners shaping their own destiny. Cale glanced at Leora. Her hair, catching the sunlight, framed a face softened by relief and determination. The bond between them had deepened far beyond survival. It was now a quiet, unshakable love tested in fire and shadow. "You ride well," he said, voice low but affectionate. She smiled, the tension of the past weeks easing. "I've had a good teacher," she replied, teasing lightly, though her eyes betrayed the warmth she felt toward him. Their journey had taught them more than survival. They had learned trust, resilience, and how to fight for something beyond themselves. And now, with Calloway gone and the townspeople free from his oppressive control, they had a chance to carve out a life defined not by fear, but by choice. They approached a small homestead nestled in a valley, the kind of place where water ran clear and the earth was fertile. It was humble, but Cale had chosen it carefully, a place that was defensible, secluded, yet capable of nurturing a future. Leora dismounted first, stretching her legs and taking in the landscape. "This could be our home?" she asked, a hint of wonder in her voice. Cale nodded, helping her from the saddle. "It will be," he said. "Not just a home, but ours, built on our terms. Protected by our hands, shared between us." They worked together to make the homestead livable, repairing fences, clearing a small field for crops, and even building a modest shelter for their horses. Each task was a step toward a life neither had expected but both longed for. A life grounded in safety, love, and shared purpose. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they sat outside the cabin, sharing a quiet meal. Leora leaned her head against Cale's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood me," she whispered. Cale's arm wrapped around her, firm and protective. "I never thought I'd meet someone I couldn't bear to lose," he admitted. "Yet here we are, and I will never let that happen." The fire crackled before them, casting long shadows that danced across the valley. For the first time, danger felt distant, almost unimaginable. They had faced bullets, betrayal, and the wilderness itself, and they had emerged together unbroken. Cale took her hand, holding it with the same care he had shown in battle, only now the stakes were different. "This life, it will have challenges," he said, "but nothing we cannot face together." Leora squeezed his hand, her smile steady and confident. "Then we face them," she said, "side by side." As darkness fell and stars dotted the sky like scattered diamonds, they sat in silence, letting the calm wash over them. The world was vast and uncertain, but in each other, they had found certainty, trust, and love. In the quiet of the night, Cale whispered, "This is our beginning, Leora. No contracts, no enemies, no shadows. Just us." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heart, and allowed herself to believe it. They had survived impossible odds. They had confronted injustice and triumphed. And now, they could finally live, not as hunted prey or warriors, but as husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. The wind blew gently through the valley, carrying the promise of tomorrow. And for Cale and Leora, tomorrow was no longer uncertain. It was theirs to shape, side by side, heart to heart forever. As the stars sparkled above and the fire burned low, they knew that whatever challenges the world still held, they would face them together, free, united, and in love.